So, James, please tell me a little bit more about Afterlife that you just presented in National Academy of Art Gallery during the Festival of Digital Art in Sofia. You were here for a very short with Jimmy Loiseau, but we were very happy to have you. How did you enjoy the festival and how you see your piece presented to the festival?
It's as you said, it's been very short, but the festival seems great. It's covering a lot of ground, so it's hard to get to see everything.
Hi,
Can't see as you're in the dark.
Gerhard, we are here. We are making a little interview.
In the darkness.
Yeah, in the darkness.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. So maybe I start in with the project. So the Afterlife is. Do you want me to describe the project?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
would be nice.
project emerged around 20 years ago. The first idea, as we were discussing this increasing shift in belief systems away from religious doctrine towards belief in technology. And the Afterlife really is at the heart of this. We looked at the work of Alcor, this cryonics company who promised that they will be able to defrost your body at some point in the future. So bodies, after they die, are held in stasis in liquid nitrogen. And the hope is that at some point in the future, technology will advance to the point that we can fix those bodies and they'll be resuscitated. So this is absolute and utter belief in technology. With this, we wanted to propose something slightly more plausible, but really get into this discussion about belief and metaphysics and so on. And we'd been working a little bit on a particular technology. We've used it on a couple of projects. It's called a microbial fuel cell. It's a device that generates electricity from organic matter. So the simple, very simple idea actually is that after a person dies, there is energy in that body. It's in a different form, but we simply translate that energy, which would normally just be, would fall back into the existing system. We capture that energy for a brief period of time, and that energy is held in a familiar dry cell battery. What that does, it allows people to, well, first of all, it gives proof of afterlife, in this case, life in the form of energy, but it then also gives the bereaving family members a choice of what to do with that battery and where to use it, what kind of product they might put the battery into, very much changing the performance or the behaviour of that product, because it's no longer got energy that we can take for granted. The energy is finite and it's come from somewhere very special, and that's the real, for us, the poetics of the project.
I was speaking with Jimmy, and I was explaining to him that for me it was quite hard to translate the text, especially because I was searching for the correct word in Bulgarian that describes serenity. I see this project as a very serenity thing happening when one is passed away. I really enjoy the idea of... Yeah, okay. Да, моля. Да. Okay, we continue. We were talking about the pieces that are related to the afterlife in your... do you know what? Maybe we can go also on the topic what you mentioned in the gallery, that you don't see yourself really as a digital artist.
Okay.
In that sense, why you said that? What is behind it?
It's not, for me, it's not a big problem. It just my training, education, where I teach now, the papers I write are all design. Design and art are connected, obviously, but subtly different. So the reason why we make these works, there may be overlaps certainly with certain people in the art world, but it's the practice that's different. So the way we practice as designers, not as artists. And for me, the fundamental difference is in the practice, in the output that we we have, the type of projects we do, I don't want people to see them as art pieces because then they interpret them differently. If something's a piece of art, it's not connected directly to everyday life the way a product is connected to everyday life. And so for me it's very important that when people look at the projects that Jimmy and myself have done over the years, they imagine what it could be like to live with them. They could imagine interacting with them. So the afterlife is probably more on the artistic realm of the projects we've done, and that it is fictitious. From a scientific or technological point of view, it could be real, but the idea of doing this to a human being is quite fictitious, and therefore it works well in the gallery context. So I can understand why for this project it does fit in with the gallery media art context, but for our broader practice we prefer to be in the design community.
Nice. You know what they say, that the design is giving solution, art is giving cause.
Yeah, that I would that definitely our work is about questions, absolutely. And so this is the difference. For designers to be doing this is quite new, and a lot of designers are upset by what we do because design is to solve problems. But for me, I have to ask, well, what is a problem?
Mm-hmm.
What problem does the iPhone solve?
Yes.
What problem is conspicuous consumption and filling our life with more plastic gadgets? What does this solve? And that is...
Царьградско затворено.
Да.
Ужас.
Yeah, so it's a newish form of design that is very much about interrogating the role of design, challenging the role of design, because for too long it's just been a slave to the market, encouraging people to buy more things.
Yeah, in
manipulating
afterlife
desire
there
and so
is a
on.
lot of ready-made actually. People really want to make themselves a battery for something that is ready-made.
This is the easiest way, but of course it's easier to buy an off-the-shelf item and then use the battery. It changes the product completely, of course.
Of course.
So the product is no longer a banal off-the-shelf
Yes.
product. It has this other level of meaning. And I think what for me is I'd like to bring that to more products. I'd like to also question the role of a lot of modern technology, like iPhones, like social media, that are provided by design products, design systems, because I just think that technology and humans were probably in a sympathetic relationship probably 40, 50 years ago. Maybe in my childhood it was different, but today our lives are increasingly mediated via screens. If you look on the metro, 9 out of 10 people are just staring at the phone, and I think this needs to be considered. I wonder what we're losing. Of course there's things to be gained. I'm not a Luddite, but those times we used to sit there and just contemplate what was happening in our lives, these moments are gone, because every single opportunity we have, we turn on the phone and we just browse nonsense.
Yeah.
More and more nonsense. Someone of my age, I can very well remember my life before. I had a long-ish adult life before we started using the smartphones. For my children's age, I've got a 14-year-old son. That's all he's ever known. And for him, it's very, very difficult to entertain himself without a phone in front of him. And however much we try and be good parents and bring a balance.
And the people who actually you invited to participate in Afterlife, for me it's bizarre that they choose exactly this kind of objects for more intimate communication. We didn't see modern technology in the presented models. We saw more something that you can touch, something that you can feel, something that you can interact with, not so much gadgets for talking, for communicating.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. I suppose people are looking for meaningful activities, poignant activities that are somehow managed by a product of some kind. There was one that wasn't there. Jimmy's wife proposed that his battery would be in an electric toothbrush. Which
Yeah, this is very intimate as well.
it's quite intimate, but it's about them kissing and the breath being fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
The placement of the thing. It's a banal product that we take for granted, but suddenly it can become intimate. It can become.
How do you
meaningful.
see it from the perspective of archiving? Do you see that this is another option that we can archive our memory in some way, we as human beings?
It is about memory for sure. It is about somehow bringing a presence back, and the presence being the presence through energy. It's just a philosophical shift in what we consider a person to be. We each have a certain time on this earth where we are composed as my body is now, and I can walk around and I can think and talk, but then when I die, these atoms will go into other things and this energy will just be transferred. It's a continuum all the way from the beginning of history, and it will continue. It's just this is a very temporary state to be in, and it's, I think, a reflection a little bit on that is a continuation of that somehow. Very temporal, because the battery will run out. This is almost the beauty of it. The batteries don't last forever. It's just another state before then the battery,
Yeah.
or the energy that you're using.
What then we can do with the leftovers in that perspective? What when even the energy is gone and only the battery is left, only the heavy body of a container that hold the energy? Because if you see it from the metaphorical perspective, in human case it's vice versa. The container is dying and the energy is forever.
Yeah.
And here it's the opposite.
Не, от тук от Оров мост нагоре е блокиран.
Yeah, it's a true point. It's
За кандидатурата.
what is a memory. That's the difference, I think, because
Да, много хубаво.
with a project like this, for us, the archiving, in terms of, I suppose, in the artistic sense, is not that much of an issue. It's like a product. I'd like to think that products could last a little bit longer than the short lifetime span that products typically have at the moment. But we live with products for 5-10 years more if it's a product that you develop a particular relationship with, like we used to with analog cameras. And I suppose that's why, again, it fits into more of a design context, because it's a designed experience that is not meant for any kind of long-term archiving. It's just for a family or a couple to reflect a little bit longer, almost like a mourning period. So the archiving is more aligned to a kind of a mourning period of time.
Yeah. Okay. What else with your other works when it comes to question to archive? Do you see it as a necessity to collect data from what have been happening with your pieces, or it's more this is this piece, it ends, then it has separate existence?
It's a good question. And again, this is the difference between the design that we're doing and a lot of mainstream design. Mainstream design, if I've make a chair, I'll finish the chair to a state that I'm happy with, and then the project is finished completely. I'll move on to something else. But the purpose of a chair is straightforward. You don't need a discussion necessarily if you're a furniture designer. Whereas the purpose, as you pointed out earlier, for us the purpose is to ask questions. So that questioning happens after the product, the object, is complete. And this is where a lot of people operating in our field, I think this is where a lot of the limitation exists, in that people don't follow through enough with archiving, with documentation, with creating interesting debates and discourse and allowing that to be used and disseminated in ways that may change the way we consume products, the way design happens. So that's something that we're working a little bit harder at these days. So it shifts the audience slightly because we're not showing in the typical gallery scenario. The newer work is existing either in live situations, like in the community projects. We were commissioned by the EU to do a design project on blockchain. So speculating on near future blockchain applications, the audience for that being legislators, people who are going to pass the laws that determine how and where blockchain is and can be used. They need to be informed about that. And so, you know, rather than just translating the complex nature of this technology into a written block, we created scenarios and speculations on how blockchain might be used. So it's a different kind of purpose. It's not sitting in a gallery and audience come and walk away thinking about it. It's much more of a, I don't want to use the curated because that's stealing from the gallery language, but the debate is more curated because we're being much more conscious about who the audience is and what their needs are, what our expectations of them is, and what they are benefiting from interacting with our work.
There are some cases that really curators stole the thunder of the artists, and they're the one who give the line where they point the point where the view should be. I also have doubts on that yet. I have in my thesis also a perspective for the collective memory, and what you said about the chair makes me really curious from that perspective, because it's not by accident you use example as a chair. You know, in the linguistic, in the semiotic, chair is a very important object. In Wittgenstein philosophy as well, it's all about the chair and the idea, and somehow this idea was preserved through the centuries. And my assumption, my hypothesis is that it's preserved by the collective memory. So what we do in the galleries from that perspective is also important, because I believe that from an archiving point of view, the collective memory will be a hard rock actor. Maybe the catalogs are helping from one hand. Of course, all the systems, archiving systems that are very trendy right now, the digitalization, it's clear. But I think that the curators, institutions like galleries and big museums are forgetting this very important actor. And I believe also that maybe you will call it a customer in the design, but the viewer in the gallery is a part of the piece of art already nowadays. And it's very hard to imagine it in a different way. So his transformation, his interpretation of the art is the one that maybe will be preserved in the future.
Yes, it's a very personal experience, this one, and if I go around, I go looking at art galleries, installations a lot. It's for me a very personal experience, and my relationship with the artist is unusual, because there's no interaction beyond what I read from their work, and I can then gather more information about the texts that might be on the wall, my previous knowledge of the artist and the work that they might have done, reports that my friends might have given who've already seen the piece and recommended it. So there's a bunch of information that gives me access or helps me understand and read what's going on beyond my own perception. But that direct connection with the artist very, very rarely happens. You know, unless you're in a group show, or if you're lucky enough to get to meet the artist.
Actually, this is one of the things that I love in our sphere. Most of the artists are still alive, so you can talk with them, you can meet.
And the world's quite small, you know, the media art world is. We've been in several shows over the years, and it's probably the fourth time I've met Stellark, and there's a bunch of other names that we've not been so involved in this area for a while, because it's two of our older projects that tended to be picked up by exhibitions of this kind, and newer works, as I say, it's shifted a bit sideways, so we've been less involved in the community.
The very interesting experience, your piece is just across the stellar piece. We choose to show video documentation instead of performance, of course, because of the financial issues, but
Yeah, of
also
course.
because in his case it's possible, and I can't really see how we can present digitally after live. So when I made a talk with him yesterday, whenever we were talking about archive, we were still shifting to the digital part of it. We were still talking about how nowadays everything's on clouds. We put stuff on the hard drives, external hard drives.
But it's a diminished experience.
Yeah.
You know, this is what we put a lot of thought into. We did one project. It's called the isophone. It's this underwater telephone. It was in the talk yesterday. There's a you can find a video of it online. We showed this at Ars Electronica in 2003 and shipped. They have a good budget, so we shipped these 2 tanks, 1.5 meters in diameter and 2.5 meters high, made of steel. It was shipped from Ireland, and this heavy and big. And so this was it was a special telephone that combined telephone technology with sensory deprivation theory to remove every sensory stimulus, everything that you don't need when you're having a phone call. So literally the only thing coming into the mind is the voice of somebody from far away. You know, the fact that it's underwater is to lose the sense of touch. And of course the perfect experience is to go in the tank. Anything else is not even close. And so when we were a few times after Ars Electronica, we've exhibited the work, but how can you show an experience if you can't have the experience? This is the problem with a lot of the digital stuff.
Absolutely.
Particularly the bigger stuff like Stellart's work.
Yeah.
You know, our isophone project was exactly the same. So then you end up making videos, which we try to make an ambient, enigmatic video that somehow conveyed the feeling. It's always a compromise. You know, and then you've got the internet, so at another level beyond, you don't have the physical object anymore to show. At least the physical object, a lot happens in the imagination. You can imagine putting it on, you can imagine what it feels like. There's some of my favourite artists operate in this way. There's a Belgian artist called Panamarenko who makes what you could call imaginary flying machines, and you never see them moving, you never hear the engine turn on, but it all happens in your mind. And I love it because of that. I think the isophone is an element of that. You can imagine what it's like, but as an available experience, it's made to work. It's a shame that we can't have more people trying it.
Yeah.
That would be the ideal scenario.
And in the case with the objects that you are using, is there any extent of the originality? Do you search for this topic at all to shift a little bit the topic? Like, do you need to keep one object always for one piece to be the unique object that was first taken on this and this place for this and this
No, not
purpose?
at all. So the isophone went through, this is very much design process, is iteration. So the first one worked okay, it wasn't great, so then we built version 2, which looked nothing like it. It's totally unrecognizable, but functionally it was much better.
So it is a version 2 or it's a second piece of art then? Second design?
It's the same, it's version 2.
Ah,
that
okay.
was just modified to perform better. We had a problem because it worked in the lab, the media lab where Jimmy and myself were working, because we just made it fit ourselves. But the problem with a helmet, you'll know if you've ride a motorcycle, is there are many sizes. There's not one size fits all for a helmet. And that's the problem we had, because we were putting the helmet on and using that to keep people's head above the water, and it was very hard to fit. So whilst it looked interesting, it was a aesthetically pleasing object that looked good in the gallery, in terms of function it was very problematic. So we had to then find a solution to that, knowing that it was going to Ars Electronica and we were going to have around 40 people trying it.
Yeah.
who we'd never met. We didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
You know, there's a responsibility because they're in a tank of water.
Yeah.
It's dark. They can't see anything.
Oh my God.
They can't really hear much. It's quite a scary. It's trust. You need trust in the designer, and you know, in us as you're going into this thing. And a couple of people did panic. There's a couple of people found it very, very problematic. What tended to happen in that case, we got it right in the end, and it did fit everybody. And they had a moment of panic, but then as soon as the person starts talking, they then focus on the conversation, and it's just, you can see the body just totally relaxed, and it worked really nicely.
Okay, sometimes I can see some of the art pieces, the new ones or technology that they use, that is disturbing.
Yeah.
Even. I'm not sure that there is really a point to go to the topic of the aesthetic behind this, because we were discussing yesterday with Stella to some point that aesthetic still is needed, and ethic is more on the focus right now, because most of the artists are struggling with ethical issues on their works, and also in Afterlife there is an ethical question.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? How you overcome this?
Well, for me it's always a complicated balancing act. The aesthetic side can lead to very easy provocation. Something's too provocative, it's too easily dismissed. It becomes fiction very quickly, and for me that's not interesting. It's too easy. And I've seen a lot of student projects, because I was teaching for 10 years, a lot of student projects. You would see some of them become viral very quickly, but they were very shallow, boring projects. They just look provocative, and it's too easy with the way, the viral nature of social media today, provocative imagery. The good balance is that it's a more subtle provocation, that people really need to, something brings them in, engages them, and then they're fully engaged and contemplating much, much deeper, and only then can you start to address the ethical issues. You know, so I wouldn't really separate them. I think they become part of the same thing. If a project's done well, this is again is the difference in purpose. For a long time when we were starting out, the just being in a gallery was wonderful. Travelling, going to cities you've not been to before, seeing your work in an exhibition. It's very rewarding. It still is, but that was enough. That was just enough, and I think that stays the same for a lot of people. But if we're going to be more ambitious, more politically engaged, more active, it's not enough. We need to be engaging with politicians and working with communities. It all depends on the nature of the project, but actually being more active in the everyday lives of people.
Yeah. And maybe for the last, I wanted to ask about the recycling and the art. Like, to what extent you are willing to recycle your pieces, because it's a new trend. A lot of artists are doing it to solve the problem with the obsolescence. If the piece is not sold to any gallery or to anybody, they destroy it on little pieces and they use the pieces for the next piece.
It's not something that interests me really.
But what do you think about this approach? How do you see it?
If it leads to interesting outcomes, there's no problem. See, this is again one of the differences between our practice and a lot of artists, is we don't sell anything. We never intended to sell anything. It's never been a motivation. So all of the pieces that we've ever made, we still have in storage.
Really?
Yeah, everything.
How many storages you have?
It's spreading.
Is it very expensive to have?
Well, we're lucky. Jimmy's at Goldsmiths College, so I kept it at the RCA for when I was at the Royal College of Art, my room was just full of shipping cases. So it's split between Jimmy's place, my place, and my workplace.
What you will do with this piece?
I have no idea. I've no idea. They're too. I don't want to break them. I don't. You know. If,
Why? What is stopping you?
I don't know. Well, first of all, they wouldn't be useful for anything. They would just go in the scrap heap. They're not.
Yeah,
They're
you
not
can bring
recyclable.
scrap, you can take money out of it, make a new
No,
piece
it's-
of art.
They're fiberglass. They're
Mhm.
they're different materials. So I've got no problem. I've got a lot of stuff in my attic in London. So I still have an apartment in London that I'm renting out. The attic is full of pieces. I'm hoping to sell this place next year, and I know then I'm going to have a skip outside, and certainly some things will be in the skip. But yeah, you never know when you get an invitation to show something. That's part of the issue. If you get a nice invitation to a great exhibition and they want a particular piece, and you say, actually, I've just scrapped it, it would be a shame.
But still, it's a very good that you said that you have storages. We also have a lot of storages in the digital sphere. Like we need to have these servers where we can keep all the little kitties from internet and this my
Yeah.
baby first steps
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And these storages are taking space
that's right.
and not really necessarily
Yeah.
always with the content. Между другото на втори терминал сме. Да, на втори.
It's
So I'm curious, do you think that sooner or later you will have to see yourself with boundaries because of your storage room? So you might want to make a big piece,
yeah.
but you will know that you will not have a place where to storage it, and then you will make a compromise and make a smaller piece.
Our pieces tend to be the size they need to be. I don't think
Okay.
we've ever made anything smaller just for the sake of making something smaller. All of the stuff in Madeira is quite big. The new project
Yeah.
that I was working on in Portugal, but Madeira has lots of space, and so everything that we did is still there. The whole of the project is left, so I don't need to worry about that for now. And the best scenario is if you're successful, you just keep getting invitations to show the work, and then it just travels, and you don't need to store it. We've not been that lucky with many of the projects. The Afterlife is probably the more successful project because it's been travelling almost non-stop since we developed it, but people have stopped showing the coffin, unfortunately, which is the biggest thing to store. And it's the most expensive piece to ship, which is part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Thank you. For sure, there are like thousands more topics that we can discuss. We had pitiless